All right, so we did our quick review on Classroom. We reviewed yesterday what is psychology and what are its goals. If you haven't done that yet, make sure you get that done as soon as possible. All right, we're on page 5 of the text, and we can go ahead and get started. So now that we know what psychology is, we can really sort of get into the types of psychology, the different types. All right. So that's where we're gonna start today. All right. So reset back to the beginning for the fire drill. All right. So psychology, then the history of psychology. So the first guy we're going to talk about is Wilhelm Wundt, or Wilhelm Wundt. All right. But he pronounces his name Wilhelm Wundt, German. And he had the very first psychology lab in Germany, 1879. And he believed the mind consisted of some basic elements that were analyzed by objective introspection. All right? So how many of you have ever taken Greek and Latin roots? So if you have, try and unbury those things in the back of your mind, okay? So if you remember yesterday, I talked about objectivity and subjectivity. And one of the things I talked about in objectivity was that it is very important in psychology because objectivity is what? Objectivity, or being objective, means you are using facts. You're being factual. So Wilhelm was saying that these basic elements in your mind are analyzed via facts of introspection. So again, introspection. Intro means inside of. All right? So basically what he's saying is you are using facts about yourself. Facts that you know are true about yourself. So, and if you look at this little graphic here, it combines 3 elements of what Wilhelm was talking about. You use your experiences, and they help influence what you do, what you say, and what you think. You take your thoughts. This is your critical thinking piece. This is what has happened in the past, and how can I change what is happening? This is sort of the control piece of the goals of psychology. How can I influence this? And the third piece is emotion. How does what's happening make you feel emotionally? And all of these things could be different at any time. So for example, if you had really bad experience with a fire drill one time, this fire drill could create a higher emotional response for you than it could for somebody else. This is common in events like post-traumatic stress. And for those of you that are unaware, post-traumatic stress is not something exclusive to military personnel. You can have post-traumatic stress on any event that can cause you an insane amount of emotional stress. You can have post-traumatic stress of being around dogs if you were attacked by a dog when you were young. You can have post-traumatic stress of driving a car if you drove a car and got in a bad accident, whatever it may be, right? Doesn't mean you can't improve and sort of get that under control more. Some people can't, all right? So when you hear the words post-traumatic stress, don't assume somebody's exaggerating. It's something that happens in your brain. It's not something exclusive for military personnel or soldiers, all right? So if we turn to our book here, page 5, again, we learn a little bit about him. So Wilhelm Wundt was born 1832. He died in 1920. He was also a physiologist and a physicist. But his main goals here attempted to apply scientific principles to the study of the human mind. He was trained in philosophy and physiology, and many of his experiments also related to psychophysics. Talk about mixing 2 things, psychology and physics. Can you imagine? That'd be an insane course, right? Which was an attempt to apply the laws of natural world to the mind. He believed that the mind was made up of thoughts, experiences, emotions, and other basic elements. To inspect these non-physical elements, his students had to learn to think objectively about their own thoughts. After all, they could hardly read someone else's mind. So what that means is when you're thinking, right, a lot of your thoughts are your personal opinion. So what Wundt is saying here is you need to think about your thoughts in a factual way. Does that make sense? You have to think about what is going on in your brain and say, okay, what are the facts? Not what am I feeling? Not is this triggering an emotional response? What is actually a fact? What is going to happen? Okay? Now, this falls under the psychological realm of structuralism, right? And this is the first major type of psychology. And Wundt, if you want to see a picture of Wundt, I've got a quick bio up here. This is what he looked like. Big old beard, small specs. This is a little bit of information about him. But basically, this is pretty important here, this first sentence on this paragraph, which is why I put it up there. 1862, Wundt offered the first course ever taught in scientific psychology. He literally invented psychology. All right? So, pretty important guy, but not the most important guy. Definitely not. But incredibly important. But there are a lot of important people. Another one, his name is Edward Tentchiner. He's a student of Wilhelm Wundt's. Edward Tentchiner is his student. So if you want to follow along in your books and you flip to page 6, you're going to see, we talk a little bit more about structuralism and Wundt's student Edward Tentchiner, which ironically enough died just 7 years after Wundt, despite being much younger. So unfortunately, he passed from this world pretty quickly. But Tentchiner took Wundt's ideas and sort of pushed them a little bit further. So he said, introspect about physical objects and thoughts, right? So for example, what is your Chromebook? It's an object. And to some people, it's a collection of plastic and silicone. There's a processor, there's some RAM, there's keys. To other people, it's literal access to information. It's the ability to learn, right? Some people would argue that internet and internet access is almost a right. Like it's a public utility, whereas books used to be the main way you gathered information. It's not anymore. We read books for fun now, right? We can still read books to learn, but computers are how we digest information now. Computers are how we find what we want to know. If you don't believe me, think of any time you've ever tried to do anything. And what's one of the first things you thought to do? One of the first things I think to do. Watch it on YouTube. I laid floor in my house. I didn't know how to do it. I watched a YouTube video. Then I knew how to do it. Not an expert, right? But you learn with these things. So what he's saying is, think about those physical objects and those thoughts introspectively. So what does a Chromebook, what does access to the internet, what does access to a computer of any kind mean to you? And the answer is going to be completely different. Because you have a Chromebook for schoolwork. How many of you are PC gamers? Anybody play video games at all? Right? Okay. Those computers are something totally different, right? Those are meant to do something different, right? So different computers can have different meanings as well. So not all computers mean the same thing to the same people, all right? So an example of this is, tell me about things that are yellow, all right? Not tell me which things are yellow. Tell me about things that are yellow. So yellow backpack. What do you think? Tell me about something that's yellow. I'm sorry? Is the sun yellow? Sure. To some people it is yellow. And what does the sun mean? You think happy when you see the sun. Anybody else kind of see that? See sunshine and you sort of equate it with being kind of happy outside, hanging out, doing fun things? Sure. But what actually is the sun? It's really, really hot, right? Some people see the sun and think, I'm going to die, right? They have this irrational fear. The sun's going to come crashing down and burn everything to smithereens, and it very well could, right? Oh, the sun doesn't move. We could crash into the sun, but the sun's not going to crash into us. But all the sun is it's a collection of hydrogen and helium being smashed together at such a high rate that it replicates light and heat that we need to survive, right? Called nuclear fission. We can't do it yet. Hopefully we can, because that would create, it would basically take less energy than it produces, which would mean forever energy, never running out. So once we could do it, that would be fantastic. All right. But Tensioner believed that every experience can be broken down into its individual emotions and sensations. He agreed with Wundt that consciousness, or the state of being aware of external events, could be broken down into basic elements. But he also believed that objective introspection, or the awareness of events that take place in the mind, could be used on thoughts as well as physical sensations. So if you wonder what this means, think about it this way. How many of you have ever described your leg or your hand falling asleep like feeling like a TV static? How would you know what that feels like? You'd have no idea. But your physical thought of that created some sort of sensation and feeling that you equate to your limbs being asleep, right? That's what's happening. You are giving a physical characteristic, a physical trait, to something that doesn't have that physical characteristic or physical trait. All right. So tensioner, very cool. Or when you say something tastes like crap, right? You mean it tastes bad, but you've probably never tasted crap. So how would you know exactly what it tastes like? But you gave an object, which you've never had that physical interaction with it before. Maybe you have, just assuming, and given it a different title. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what's going on here with Tensioner. Really important. He's also a structuralist and studied structuralism. All right. And probably the last guy we're going to get to talk about today is William James. He is a functionalist. He studies the functionalism side of psychology. All right. And he had this idea of stream of thought versus elements of mind. Okay. So stream of thought is basically the collection of little pictures. So if you think about a video cameras just take a ton of pictures in a row. That's how we create video. So the stream of thought is the same way. Stream of thought are the little pictures of your mind as you progress through whatever thought it is that you're having. So how many of you have ever had a conversation with somebody and you started one place and then you went to a bunch of other places and ended somewhere totally different, right? That's sort of a microcosm, or like a small look at what he's talking about with stream of thought. So your stream of thought is everything that you kind of go through throughout the day. It's little snapshots, pictures of what's going on, versus the elements of your mind, right? So what do you think elements of your mind are? Elements of your mind are the definitive things that we know happen in your brain, your personality, your emotional response, sort of the structural things, right? He believed that those are what happens in your stream of thought. All right, so I'm going to read to you something real quick. Starts on page 6, and we'll jump over to page 7. Tensioner believed that scientific study of consciousness itself was not yet possible because conscious ideas are constantly flowing like an ever-changing stream, and once you start thinking about what you were just thinking about, what you were thinking about is no longer what you were thinking about. It's what you are thinking about. Does that make sense? So if you think about what you were thinking about, that's no longer what you were thinking about because you're thinking it now, and it's what you are thinking about at that time. So it's sort of a weird thing, right? Kind of like Johari's window. When we were talking about Johari's window, your unknown self is what you don't know about yourself, and what everybody else doesn't know about you. But as soon as you become aware of it, it's no longer unknown self because you know about it. It either goes into your public self or your hidden self, right? So it's one of those types of things here. All right, so we'll end it here today.